In Factorio, you must mine resources farther and farther away from your main base as the game progresses. Resources are not infinite. To this end, it is common to move the resources back to base using trains. If a factory is being fed by train-delivered resources, it will not have any input whenever there is no train at the station. To fix this, it is also common to unload trains into a buffer of chests, rather than directly onto belts. Similarly, where resources are being produced, it is common to load them into a buffer before loading them onto the train. If your factory consumes products slower than they're being produced, which is generally a good thing, then the buffer will slowly fill, and eventually the train will get stuck waiting to unload into full chests. You might think there's nothing wrong with this. The factory is happy. But something feels intuitively wrong about this. Surely it can't be a good thing to just have the train tied up somewhere wasting its time. Now, if there were only one unloading station, this would be a silly concern. But as soon as you add a second, or third, or fourth unloading station, the intuition proves correct. The train really is wasting its time. The buffer here is full, and there's an empty buffer elsewhere it should be filling. Worse, since the original drop is closer to the source than the newer one, trains will always prefer to go there first, regardless of how badly the newer one needs resources. This inefficiency is especially painful when handling a spike of demand. Even though this buffer is sitting empty, it still preferred to go to this drop because it was closer. I'd like to explain my train system that attempts to solve these problems, partially to solicit feedback on how the system could be improved, but also to share the joy of what I've created. I put a lot of work into this, and I'm quite happy with it. My system has one goal: keep as many jobless trains as possible waiting in a depot with empty cargo. Every train that waits to pick up or drop items is a train that can't be assigned to a different job, and depending on how slowly production is running at that point, the train could be stuck for quite a while. Let's follow a train around a bit to see how the system works. First, the train starts at a depot, where it waits for a job to become available. Right now, there are drop locations requesting items, but no pickup locations can supply any, so the train stays put. You can see here there's a train limit of 1. Train limit of 1. but these have a train limit of 0. Let's go ahead and fix that. This red light indicates that a pickup has enough to supply a full load. Now, the train can depart. It will pick up the cargo, and then head to the drop point. In the time it took to drop that load off, another load has become available. So the train is heading there now. Now, it could go drop these items off at the first drop point, but there's another station a little bit further away that needs items even more. It has no items at all. This train will head there first, even though it's further away. Next, some copper is available to be picked up, so it's going to handle that request now. Copper is being produced more slowly. I'll speed up the game so we can watch as the train fills all the chests. It's a little bit fast, but you can see how the train evenly fills all the items as they're available. The iron is done, but we still need to fill the copper. Unfortunately, the train has picked up a load of iron, and now it's waiting in depot for a drop to become available. There's not much I can do about this without even more over-engineering. A single train just can't supply everything, especially if nothing is actually being consumed, like in this example. Let's add a second train to help it out. It's going to go straight for copper now. It won't pick up any more iron, because there's already an iron train in the depot. It will return to the depot and wait for copper to become available, but it never picks up anything it can't use. Finally, all the chests are full. It looks like both trains are stuck with items in the depot, but that seems okay for now. Of course, this system generally works better the more trains you have. Let's see the same demo again, but with 6 trains, and I'll also throw in 4 fluid trains. Firstly, let's go look and see how the design handles a stacker. We have lots of oil available, so we're going to get a rush of trains here soon. The drop point shows 4 red lights. There's 4 lights because it wants 4 trains. The tanks here are empty, it needs 4 full loads, and it has a 3 stacker, so it should be able to handle this all at once. The lights are red because the drop is requesting as many trains as it can request. It's detecting a shortage. Once the train arrive, lights turn green, and the level drops to 3. It's no longer requesting the maximum possible. The tanks are quickly filled. Let's go see how the iron is doing. We can see that all the train stations are fully satisfied, all the chests are full. And if we go look at the depot, there's only a single iron train stuck waiting with resources. We also have some fluid trains that are full, but there is at least one that's free. Pretty good, I think. Again, not perfect, but I think that reaching perfection here would require more complexity than I'm willing to accept. This is already pretty complex. Any more, and I'd be implementing the logistics train network mod in vanilla. Other than this small imperfection, I think I've solved every possible problem in fairly distributing resources by train. Can you think of any that I missed? Do you like my system? Is it too much complexity for its benefits? Please, let me know. I want to take a minute to yap about my justification for all this. I know that most of the problems I've described here are pretty small. Most players can use buffering without any fancy logic. If they notice that no train is running to a new drop station, they can just place another train if they don't want to wait. And then they can add a depot later if they run into a blockage. The problems created by buffering just aren't big enough to warrant this level of effort for most players. That's totally fair. The issue of prioritizing emptier stations can be solved by just producing more of whatever item is needed. Most problems in Factorio can be solved by just producing more stuff. But the small problems bothered me, at least in principle, and it's not always easy to double or triple your number of outposts, so I found this venture worth it. Lastly, you can also short-circuit all of these problems by just not buffering at all. I think there's a good argument for that, especially for a mega base. But in early to mid-game, there's a lot of spiky demand, especially as you're still figuring out the new planets. If I were trying to achieve something like 1 million science per minute, I would probably pursue a bufferless solution. It's possible that I would use this to build my megabase, and then try to switch my network to bufferless, but I'm not sure if the hassle of switching is worth the early benefits. With that out of the way, if you'd like to see how this works, keep watching. Very quickly before I get into that, I wanted to take some time to properly show the final state. I cut it off a little bit the last time. Here we can see that there's one iron and one copper train, and this time there's 2 oil trains. Still plenty of free trains to spare. So let's get into the details. First, let's look at the schedule. The only fixed stop is the depot. The train will go here if it can't reach any other destinations. Then it will wake up every 10 seconds to see if the situation has changed. The first interrupt checks for fuel. If the train is low, it goes and fills up. Next, it checks if it's carrying any items. If it is, and the corresponding drop point has space to receive a drop, it will go do that. Lastly, if it's not carrying any items, and a pickup is available, it will go receive a pickup. Simple, right? Wrong. This is only a tiny slice of the picture. The depot has the first piece of logic I want to look at. Now, don't get too worried. This mess of combinators is for my supply train. I talked about that in a previous video. The only thing we're worried about is this little combinator right here. It reads the train contents and divides all signals by themselves and puts the output on this global network. Since every depot does this, the green wire carries the number of trains stopped at depots with a given item. Producers can then read this signal and set their limit to 0 if they find their product in the list. That's how trains know not to pick up any more items once there's a train in depot. The biggest weakness with this setup is that I can't ferry anything used by my supply trains, so light oil, sulfuric acid, belts, etc. Since the supply train carries these items, the depot will report that they're buffered, and any listener would interpret that as meaning the product is available, even though it's not. I could fix this by using a selector combinator in count mode to filter out any trains with more than one kind of item. I could also use a separate depot for my supply trains. I like both of these solutions, but I'm not sure if I am actually going to run into this problem. For now, I only know for sure that I'll be using this system for Nalvis outposts. I don't know what else the game has in store for me, so I don't want to make things more complicated. The other downside is that my global network only has 2 channels, red and green. I've used the green. If I use the red, I'll be out. I decided I was okay paying this price for 2 reasons. Number 1, I'd hate to not use it, just in case, and then never use it. I have it. I want to use it. If I found out that's a bad idea, then I can redesign things. Number 2, I do still have the radar network, so technically I still have 3 channels to spare. I think I'll be fine. The pickup is where things get complicated. First, let's look at this constant combinator. We have M, which is the maximum number of trains that can ever be summoned here. Since there's no stacker, this is set to 1. Next, we have the number of slots in a buffer chest, and the number of slots in a train. This arithmetic combinator reads the total number of items and renames the signal to N, so that the logic can work no matter what items are in the chest. This selector combinator reads the stack size of the item. This arithmetic combinator converts the stack size to S. This arithmetic combinator computes the maximum number of items in the chests as the number of slots multiplied by the stack size. We don't actually need that signal here, but it's used by the drop station, and I left it in the blueprint for consistency. In the same manner, this arithmetic combinator computes the maximum number of items in the train. This important arithmetic combinator computes L as the number of items in the chest divided by the number of items that can fit in a train. Because Factorio uses integer division, L is the number of trains that can be completely filled by the buffer. Now, it would be nice to just set the train limit to this signal, but it would be bad if we tried to call 4 trains here with no stacker. That would really gum up the system. The collection of these 3 combinators clamps L to at most M. L is fed into both of these decider combinators. This one outputs L if L is less than M. This one outputs M if L is greater than or equal to M. Only one of these can be true at once, so the final arithmetic combinator just renames whatever it gets to L. This system predates the 2.0 update, and I was really excited hearing about the selector combinators because I thought they would greatly simplify this logic. There is a mode to select the minimum signal. Unfortunately, it can't select a 0 signal. I should have expected that. A 0 signal is the same as a signal that doesn't exist. There is no null in Factorio circuits. So to use a selector, I would first have to use an arithmetic to add 1 to both L and M, use the selector to choose the minimum, and then add another arithmetic to subtract the one out. That's still 3 combinators, and I don't think it's any more simple or intuitive. So I left the logic unchanged. I'm still sad about it. So finally, we have the train limit L here. We can send that limit to the station. There's still a few things left to do. Most importantly, we have to set the priority. This is the secret sauce that allows trains to travel further to stations that have more product. This will ensure that resources get used evenly. This arithmetic combinator adds the unclamped train limit to a fixed offset and uses the output to set the priority. We want to use the unclamped limit because otherwise all stations clamped to 1 would have the same priority, which we obviously don't want. As far as priority is concerned, we do have an unlimited amount of space. If one station has an unclamped limit of 7, and another has an unclamped limit of 3, we want trains to pick up from that 7 first, regardless if they're both clamped to just 1. The offset is helpful because it preserves the ability to designate certain stops as higher priority. If you're trying to quickly mine up a resource patch, you can bump up the priority so it will always get pulled from first, as long as it has some product. Or maybe you have an outpost that's in a dangerous spot, and you only want to use it if you actually need it, so you crank the priority down to prevent trains from going unless they really need it. I'm not sure of all the various reasons you might want to set the priority, but this system preserves the ability to do that. Lastly, we have a little bit of icing on top. We can see the train limit by selecting the station, but it's cooler to be able to see it in the lights. So each light is set to be enabled only if if L is above its threshold. If the limit is 4, 4 lights will be on. If it's 2, 2 lights will be on, and so on. These 2 deciders pick the color of the lights. If L is less than M, it will output green. If L is greater than M, it will output red. Greater than or equal to M, it will output red. Only one of these signals will be true, so we can just connect them together and feed that into the lights. In summary, these combinators read the amount of product on hand, compute the number of trains that can be filled with that amount, and then sets the train limit and priority accordingly. Up here, we have some extra logic to disable the stop if a train is carrying that item in the depot. This arithmetic combinator reads the item being produced as 1 by dividing the count by itself. If there is no item, this won't work, but then the train limit will always be 0, so it would never call a train here anyway. Next, this signal is multiplied by 1000, so we have a signal for the item being produced with a value of 1000. We want to add this to the signals from the global network to filter out the item being produced. If we add the two signals together, then anything over 1000 must mean that the item in question is at the depot. There's no way to have 1000 trains sitting in depot carrying the same item. So we can output D as 1 if there are any signals greater than 1000. Now, we have to be careful here. We can't add this 1000 signal to the global network. That would mess up every other station. So we use this arithmetic combinator to copy the signals from the global network and cut it off. We can then safely operate on the output here without changing the globals. Lastly, we can multiply D by this -1000 constant L signal and add that to the L train limit computed by the chests. If D is 0, then the output is 0, so the L down south won't be changed. But if D is 1, the output is -1000, so the train limit will be 1000 less than whatever the chests say. I don't think even legendary quality chests would be able to fit 1000 train loads, so this effectively turns the system off. We also have a light here to turn purple to indicate that it's been turned off by the depot. In summary, this extra bit of logic disables the train stop if there are any trains carrying the produced item in depot. The fluid pickup works almost exactly the same. I won't explain every combinator. There's no stack size for fluids, so those combinators are completely gone. The logic for counting the maximum storage is a little different, so I used a different signal. Other than those changes, it's completely identical. Drop stations use almost exactly the same logic with only a few small changes. Firstly, there is one extra arithmetic combinator here. N is computed by subtracting the number of items from the maximum number of items. This inversion means the trains are requested based on the amount of empty space, rather than the number of items. Secondly, this constant combinator exists to ensure there's always at least one of the requested item being read. This selector needs at least one in order to read the stack size. Without this, the stack size would be 0, which means the total storage space is 0, which means it could never expect a train. We already need the station name to include the item, so it can be found by the dynamic interrupt. So the blueprint has been parameterized to include this value. When you try to place it, the game will ask you for the item before it's placed. The last change is merely the absence of the off switch. There's no need to ever turn off a drop station. If it's being used infrequently, its priority will stay low, so it won't suck up more items than are available. If it eventually fills up anyway, it won't be requesting trains anymore. And if you really needed to manually turn it off, you could set the max to 0. Again, fluids are exactly the same, just even simpler. We still have to subtract from the max to get the number of trains, but there's no stack size, so every fluid uses the same numbers. I could still parameterize the blueprint if I wanted, so I don't have to change the stop name, but pretty much every fluid stop on Novice that uses the system is going to be crude oil, so I haven't bothered to do that yet. Overall, I'm really happy with this. It's not a perfect system, but I think the only way to do better is to build an actual microcomputer that can assign requests to specific trains from start to finish. That is way beyond what I want to do here. Maybe one day. I think I found the best compromise for trains filled with items waiting in depots. I could have made the limiting factor the number of stations requesting items. That would provide more immediate feedback to the system, but it can still cascade into failure since all providers would wake up as soon as a single requester says it needs something. By tying it to the depot, I've guaranteed that I can't have more than one for each outpost in the absolute worst case. I think my biggest actual gripe with the system is that there's no way to set the train stop color dynamically. I could read the item and use it to select from a list. It would get bulky fast, but even just doing this for a handful of common items would still be nice. It's just a bit annoying that after all the work the developers have done here, dynamic trains, parameterized blueprints, it's still not enough to just slap down a train blueprint and move on. You still have to interact with it before you can safely continue. Now, you can interact with ghosts now, so at least you don't have to wait for it to be built. Maybe in 2.1? I can dream. Did I miss anything else? Boy, I sure hope not. But I'd rather found out early than late, if there's some failure case I haven't considered. What do you think? I think this is going to be my last video for a while. These take a long time to produce. It's been worth it because it helps me iron out all the kinks and make sure I haven't missed anything. The next thing I'm going to work on before jumping into the game is my starter base, but I don't feel the same need for feedback there. I'm going to find out very quickly if it works or not, and the problem is just so much less complicated. After that, I'll be on new planets, and I can't pre-plan any of this. It's going to be all spaghetti for me for a while. I've realized that most of the people watching these videos haven't actually played the game. I dearly hope I haven't scared you off. The game is really not this complicated. I hope I explained how the simple solutions are good enough for most players. I'm really being overly nitpicky, mostly for the sake of it. To anyone who gave me any amount of feedback or conversation, thank you so much for taking the time to help me and enjoy this with me. It means a lot to me.